Hello, everybody watching from home, wherever you might be in the world, in the United States of America. We're here with Professor Allan J. Lichtman, my dad.
Anyone in the world could be watching us.
Anybody in the world could be watching us, that's correct.
Wow.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to Michael D'Souza, to Staffer, to Joshua D., to iHeart NY 2001, to Connor Kotara. Hello, Connor. Hello, everybody tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. We are so glad you're with us today. Patrick Murray, Captain N90s. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Andrew. Hello, Andrew. We have a special show today talking, our main topic today, Dad, is voting rights. If you don't know, there is recently, I think, on September 5th, Alabama's congressional map was struck down by a federal court for diluting black voters' power.
For the second time.
For the second time, for diluting black voters' powers, which is a big win for voting rights. If you don't know, my dad, Allan Lichtman, has been working in voting rights for how long now?
Oh, since I was 9, back in the early 1980s.
Oh, come on, tell him. Okay, since the 1980s. Okay,
early 1980s.
Okay. Do you want to tell him a little bit about what you've done in voting rights, Dad?
First, I want to say we're going to dedicate this show to a giant of voting rights, the lawyer Gerald Hebert, who sadly passed away this morning. I want to reach out to his wife, Victoria, their children, Christy, Greta, Brooke, Josh, Marley, and their entire extended family, including many grandchildren, of which I most greatly envy. Hear that, Sam?
Yes.
For so many years, Jerry served as a lawyer for the Department of Justice, the Campaign Legal Center, leading the national fight for voting rights for marginalized peoples. Jerry achieved major victories that have shaped politics in the United States. But I've been an expert myself in over 100 cases, worked numerous times with lawyer Hebert. And I just want to say, I remember most the early days back in the 1980s when Jerry and I would go to these small communities where white supremacists had had their feet on the neck of black people, literally for centuries. And for the first time, when we came down there, they saw the government on their side, not on the side of the rich and the powerful. And it was incredible, providing these minority peoples, for the first time, their right to fully participate in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. I remember most significantly the work that Jerry and I did in Selma, Alabama. You may know, Selma in 1965 was the birthplace of the Voting Rights Act, with the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge by advocates of voting rights and the brutal response of law enforcement. That sparked, along with the support from President Johnson, the enactment of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Fast forward to the mid-1980s, there still had been no voting rights in Selma or in Dallas County, where Selma was the county seat, as a result of a discriminatory at-large system where the entire jurisdiction voted for every member of the city council and the county commission. No black person had ever been elected to either of those positions, even though Selma and Dallas County were about half black. Well, Jerry, with my help, persisted through a very hostile judge. We lost, but we persisted. We lost again. Jerry then appealed to the 11th Circuit, and the 11th Circuit agreed with him and said, enough. There has to be a fair plan for Dallas County. And Jerry and I drew a plan, a fair plan for Dallas County and Selma, with 2 black districts, 2 white districts, and 1 swing district. And lo and behold, for the first time in history, black people in Selma and Dallas County were able to elect candidates of their choice, even winning a majority. And I have very fond memories of Jerry and I going down to Selma for the ceremony celebrating the first elections of black people in the place that gave us the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This was one of so many gritty, determined triumphs for the great late Jerry Hebert. He is irreplaceable, and he will be greatly missed by all of us who believe in justice in this country.
What do you see for the future of voting rights? We know this is a good sign for, in terms of this current Alabama map. There's been some other good signs, right?
Yes. There is a great paradox now in our political system when it comes to voting rights. Surprisingly, the courts have been quite amenable to upholding the voting rights of minorities in the United States. That's what happened in Alabama. You know, Alabama has a population that's more than 25% black, but through racial gerrymandering, the white majority in the legislature has only created one black district, packing blacks into that district, and then cracking the rest of the black communities and putting them in overwhelmingly white districts. Well, a 3-judge panel of Trump appointees said you can't do that. That violates the Voting Rights Act. And the Supreme Court agreed, remarkably, 5-4, and said, Alabama, you got to create a second black opportunity district that's either black majority or very close. And so what did the white majority in the Alabama legislature do? The Republicans, who were supposedly, avowedly the party of law and order, they defied law and order. Says, we don't care what the Supreme Court says. And they did not create a second black opportunity district. The case went back to the Court of Appeals, and they scathingly scolded Alabama and said, you have defied the rule of law. And they appointed a special master to create a second black district in Alabama. And we may see much the same thing in the state of Louisiana as well. In addition, in Florida, Governor DeSantis imposed upon the Florida legislature a redistricting plan that dismantled a black opportunity district in northern Florida that had elected a black representative, Al Lawson, ever since it was created. And Florida has a constitutional amendment saying you cannot have a redistricting plan that diminishes black opportunities. DeSantis didn't care. But we just a couple of days ago had a decision from the state court saying what DeSantis did violated the rights of black people, violated the Constitution of Florida, and the plan must be withdrawn. So what we're seeing here is courts being much more amenable to voting rights than we might have expected, but at the same time, Republicans defying the rule of law and trying to preserve their power at all costs. We see a very troubling situation developing in the state of Wisconsin, a slightly Democratic-leaning state where, because of gerrymandering, Republicans have supermajorities in the state House and state Senate. A challenge has been filed to that, and just recently, a liberal was elected overwhelmingly by the people of Wisconsin by 10 points to create a 4-3 liberal majority on the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. So what are Republicans doing? They're threatening to impeach this new justice who hasn't even made a single decision. They have no grounds for impeachment other than an attempt to preserve their illegally gained political power. So we're seeing the yin and the yang of voting rights in America today. And by the way, if you want to see the whole history of voting rights, it's all written up in my book, The Embattled Vote in America, from the founding to the present. You know, the players change, the issues change, but the battle remains the same from, the 18th century to the present. Voting rights are not given. They have to be fought, struggled, and battled for.
You guys are getting a treat here. I mean, you don't get this on traditional media for sure. I mean, this guy is an expert in voting rights, and it's one of the most important things that I think gets overlooked by most traditional media outlets.
It's hardly mentioned, and yet
right.
the vote is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious what you think. You've been doing this for so long. Are you hopeful for the future? Do you think? I think, even though it's not covered in traditional media, there is certainly more coverage of it than it was 10 years ago, than it was 20 years ago. Do you think that's right? Do you think you're hopeful for the future? What are your thoughts?
I'm hopeful for the future. I've said so many times, I'm very down on the media. The media wants what's spectacular and what brings ratings. They give way too much coverage to Donald Trump because he spurs rating, and way too little coverage to things that really shape the future of this country, like voting rights, for example, and like climate change. And again, we would refer them right to, Vote Climate PAC.org, your mom's political action committee that has the nation's only voting guide that can lead you to how to vote climate.
Okay. We have a question on the 13 keys by Starries. They say, since the 13 keys are based on the incumbent party, it doesn't matter if the GOP nominees Trump, DeSantis, or more moderates Christie, Haley, or Scott.
Sadly, that's correct. The identity of the Republican candidate doesn't matter, which means that if things go badly enough for the Biden administration, Donald Trump could be elected president once again based on the keys. However, we could have such a historically unprecedented situation if Donald Trump is convicted of a serious felony and even put in prison. Would that be enough to shatter the historical basis of the keys? I haven't made up my mind on that because it's still hypothetical, and I don't, as you all know, don't opine on hypotheticals when it comes to the keys.
Thank you, Starries, for your question.
Great question.
We've got a question from Andrew. They say, when I hear Alabama, I always think of George Wallace. You lived in this era, Dad. You're a dinosaur, right?
I remember George Wallace very well.
They want to know your thoughts, obviously, about him and any interesting tidbits that you remember about George Wallace.
George Wallace became famous, just like the current leaders in Alabama, for defying the law. He defied a federal ruling that University of Alabama had to be desegregated. He stood in the schoolhouse door famously saying, segregation tomorrow, segregation today, segregation forever. It was all an act, by the way. He had no power to stop the federal forces from enforcing federal law, but he then positioned himself as the primary national defender of segregation. And he then ran for president on an independent ticket in 1968. No longer explicitly avowed segregation, but clearly he remained a white supremacist candidate and won several Deep South states. His hope was, get this is very important understanding the American electoral system, was to win enough electoral college votes to deny either Richard Nixon, the Republican, or Hubert Humphrey, the Democrat, a majority in the electoral college. Do you know what happens then, Sam?
I wasn't listening. I'm sorry. I had to monitor the chat. I had to listen to you.
Monitor the
okay,
chat,
sorry.
much more important. It goes to the U.S. House, with each house having just one vote. So Alabama has the same votes as Texas, Florida, and California. And Wallace hoped to be the kingmaker, controlling the swing votes of the South and decide who would be the next president and shape the platform. We came that close. He didn't keep Nixon from getting a majority, but he came close.
A nice chat from Peggy Smith. They say, all your books are going to be on my bookshelf soon. I listened to The Case for Impeachment twice.
Wow.
So thank you, Peggy. And she also wants to know, are all your books on audio? I don't think so.
A bunch of them are.
A bunch of them
you
are.
You can check with Amazon, but a bunch of them are.
So Peggy, check with Amazon. If they're not on Amazon, they're probably they don't have the audio
Yeah,
version.
Amazon
but,
would have the audio.
beat me by 37. Sorry, beat me by 37. Writes, I'm a huge fan. What's Chris Christie's endgame for 2024? Is he just a kamikaze candidate, or is he actually trying to get the nomination? Thanks, Alex.
Well, every candidate, no matter how far down, believes that somehow, the God will descend in a basket from the heavens and, give them a victory. But Chris Christie's a very smart guy, and he knows he has no chance. So in effect, he is a kamikaze candidate. I hate to use that term, actually, but he is on a mission. His mission is to try to move the Republican Party away from Trump. Good luck. It's not going to happen. This is Trump's Republican Party, not just because of Trump, but because what Trump represents has now become the mainstream of the Republican Party. This notion of the Trump wing versus the mainstream wing, that's another one of the many fallacies that the media perpetrates. In fact, there is no mainstream, old-fashioned, Gerald Ford-type republicanism anymore. The overwhelming weight of the Republican Party is MAGA.
That is true. Bryce E. points out, I just looked this up, there's a black mayor of Alabama, apparently, Patrick Braxton. Have you ever heard of him, Dad?
Is he the mayor of Montgomery?
I'm not exactly sure. But
at any rate, what's the question?
And I'm looking at
There have been black mayors of these black majority cities in Alabama.
Yeah.
Birmingham, Montgomery.
It's a rural black town, but apparently, I didn't even know this. He's being locked out of the city hall. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't. And I'd like to look into that.
So,
it reminds me of what happened in Tennessee when the two black legislators got expelled. Something that just never happens except for the most egregious type of offenses. They got expelled for being too vociferous in their advocacy of gun control legislation. And of course, they got reelected. And the third member, a white woman, did not get expelled. Only the two black people got expelled. But she's now running for the Senate in Tennessee.
Yeah, she just
has very little chance in such an overwhelmingly red state, but she'll make noise.
She just announced yesterday, I believe.
Yeah.
Connor Katara. What's up, Connor?
We've had Connor before.
Yes. They say, do you think that RFK Jr. will do as good in the 2024 primaries as Bernie Sanders did in 2016? Or is it going to be like 1980 or 1968?
Yeah, I don't think he'll come close. I think it'll be more like 1968. The rule of thumb for third-party candidates is you take their best polling numbers and you cut it in half. So I don't think he's even going to rise as high as 20%. Sanders rose as high as 40%, and that was one of the keys that was counted against the Democrats.
Immunity to COVID, I think we lost connection. Damn it, hold on. All right, I think we're back. I think, I don't know where we ended off, but I think once RFK Jr. said that stuff about Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people having immunity, he kind of fell off a cliff. I mean, I don't think anybody's taking him seriously.
But on the other hand, we've reached this point in our politics, and this is one of the saddest things, being a professor for over 50 years and teaching my students to search for truth, that it doesn't seem to matter how blatantly and scurrilously politicians lie. It doesn't seem to hurt them. And, once you lose the truth, then your democracy could follow down the drain as well.
Michael D'Souza Cruz, a common viewer, says, voting is the most important thing that you can do in democracy. People who belittle the importance of voting I'm not going to read the rest of it. But yes, we agree with you, Michael. Voting is the most important thing in a democracy. Here's an interesting question from Ross Goldberg. Given that the GOP has become increasingly unpopular and their white Christian base has been greatly continually declining, why can't they try to have a much more diverse coalition of voters?
This has been a matter of debate within the GOP for some time. After they lost in their view, surprisingly, to Barack Obama in 2012. A lot of Republicans expected Mitt Romney to win, as did a lot of pundits, even though the keys pointed to an Obama reelection. They kind of had, a reevaluation. And basically, they rejected following the path of trying to broaden their coalition. They believed they could not compete with Democrats for the increasingly diversifying electorate, and instead opted for energizing their base vote of older white voters. And it hasn't worked out all that badly for them in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be very difficult for the GOP to sustain power. That's why they're trying to rule from the minority through things like a racial gerrymandering, through a unproportional electoral college, U.S. Senate, through defying the courts. We saw Ron DeSantis dismissing two elected Democratic attorney generals in the counties. We see Wisconsin considering impeaching a justice elected overwhelmingly by the people. So it's kind of a dual strategy.
Thank you, Ross. An interesting question from President Nieto, a common viewer. What's up, Nieto? One of our many presidents in the chat. Do you ever get nervous making Keys predictions? If so, which elections had you the most nervous?
I get unbelievably nervous. Unlike clerks like Nate Silver, who say, 2016, there was a 78% chance Hillary Clinton would win. Then when Hillary Clinton loses, he said, see, I told you there was a 22% chance she would lose. So, they can never be right and they can never be wrong. I make absolute predictions about who's going to win and who's going to lose. And I am incredibly nervous because I know I'm hanging out on that limb every 4 years. And I know my critics will shoot cannonballs at me if I'm wrong. And obviously, the most nerve-wracking one was 2016, predicting Donald Trump against all the weight of other academics, all the weight of all the pollsters and the pundits. There was an eminent group, Princeton University professors, highfalutin Ivy Leaguers who said, our analysis shows Hillary Clinton has a 99% chance of winning. And the head of the group, Professor Sam Wang, said, if she loses, I'll eat a bug. And true to his word, he did eat a bug on national television.
Will you eat a bug?
I'm not eating any bugs.
Okay, no
I'm
bugs.
too old for that.
No bugs for this guy.
No bugs.
Will there be a 2024 edition of the Keys to the White House? That's
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It'll be out, in about a year.
All right. Thank you, Hit, for that question.
A little less than a year.
Okay, a little less than a year. Theo Meal. What's up, Theo? Thank you for the question. They ask, how would you judge Biden's versus Obama's presidency as a historian? Is Biden a better, more important POTUS as he's had to fight for democracy itself?
It's, of course, too early to judge any presidency. You can't judge a presidency in the midst of it. But I will say, Biden is the most underrated president that I can recall. And my recollection, being an old guy, goes back a long way. Somehow, maybe because of the media's obsession with Trump and all the drama around Trump, Biden has not gotten anywhere near the credit he should for his accomplishments. His domestic achievements are greater than any president since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society in the 1960s. He single-handedly saved Ukraine. It was Biden and Biden alone who brought together the Western coalition that was so essential for supporting Ukraine and giving them arms and ammunition and support. Otherwise, Russia would have, I think, quite easily have taken Ukraine. And for some reason, most people don't even know about these triumphs of Joe Biden. They just think he's this, hapless, ineffectual old guy. And I've got to defend old guys, by the way.
Yeah.
And by the way, Trump is not much younger.
We know. One of our concurrent viewers, Andrew, what's up, Andrew? He asked a question, and I'm also confused about this. So, what happens if Trump wins and then he gets convicted in Georgia and he can't pardon himself? Can Kemp pardon him? Like, what happens then? Do you have? I mean,
I
I'm a little confused by that too, honestly.
Well,
the whole world's
is
confused by that.
'cause
Yeah,
there's no clear answer.
right.
Trump has driven us sadly into this uncharted terrain. But no, he can't pardon himself from a state crime. It's unknown whether he can even pardon himself from a federal crime. That would have to be decided. But it's quite clear the pardon power only applies to federal crimes. And the system in Georgia, as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, is Kemp cannot individually pardon Trump. There's like a committee that would have to issue the pardon.
So if he wins and he's convicted in Georgia, could he technically be the president from jail?
I guess that's not impossible.
That's so strange. Thank you, Andrew, for that question. All right, I think we're back now. We were just saying that it would be extreme if we didn't catch this. It would be extremely strange if Trump ends up convicted in Georgia. Could he be president from a jail cell? Maybe. Nobody knows. So strange.
Those jail cells in Fulton County are,
we know,
they're not the Hilton Hotel.
13 Keys Tracker is in the chat. If you all haven't seen their page, go to their page. It's a really nice job they've done. This is a question also I'm interested in.
Before we get away from this thing about Trump possibly being in jail in Georgia,
yeah.
Under Georgia, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is under Georgia law, if you're convicted of a racketeering, a RICO crime, you have to be sentenced to a minimum of 5 years.
So he could be in jail for his entire prison sentence.
Conceivably,
I mean, he could
who
be
knows?
in jail for his entire presidential term.
Yeah.
That's
I don't
strange.
think he would live through 5 years in jail, quite frankly.
That's really strange. Where are we? This is a question I've been wondering too. Barry Smith asks, has No Label, you know who No Labels are?
I do.
Yeah. Has No Labels gained any real traction or momentum for 2024? Should the incumbent party be worried that this third party will siphon away their votes?
The incumbent party should always be worried about third party or independent movements because that is one of the keys. But it can't just be a minor movement. They have to be at around at least 10% in the polls shortly before the election, or at least in the election year. And so far, I haven't seen any indication that No Labels is going to get anywhere near that momentum or that they have an appealing candidate. When third parties have made an impact, it's usually because they have a charismatic, inspirational type of candidate. Whether you like them or not, the prime examples would be Ross Perot in 1992 and George Wallace in 1968.
What's your overall thoughts on No Labels, Dad?
I think it's a waste of our breath. I kind of looked at some of their material. I see it, offering no real brilliant, striking ideas for the country or any chance that, they would gain the kind of power needed to put their program into effect. And I'm very suspicious, and I can't prove this, but I have seen news reports that, right-wing rich donors are behind No Labels simply because they think it could hurt Biden's reelection chances.
We have a chat from Derek Taylor. Hello, Derek Taylor. We love you, Derek Taylor. They say, I know you don't believe that polls are accurate, but there must be a poll or polls that you do believe in.
I don't believe in any polls.
Nice.
Wait, you cut me off 14 months before an election. Those polls have been proven to have zero predictive value. Very early polls, for example, showed Jimmy Carter beating Ronald Reagan in 1980, and Ronald Reagan went on to defeat him in a landslide. Early polls have zero predictive value, and I am so dismayed to see even a network or cable outlet that I respect like CNN spending, 20 minutes to a half an hour on these polls that have absolutely no meaning. And they particularly have a much less meaning now because we have this unprecedented situation of Trump perhaps, sometime in the future being convicted of serious crime. And who knows how that is going to scramble the polls. The problem is polls are too easy. You don't even have to get out of bed in the morning to write a story about the polls. It doesn't require any effort, any investigation, any intellectual brain power, but it looks like it means something. And again, it is so shameful to see the networks playing up polls the way they do.
This guy is anti-polls, guys, if you didn't get that already. Kana Katara asks, why do you think Trump got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016? Obama, Bush 41, and Carter received less votes on their second run.
Yeah, he received more votes, but he lost by a bigger margin in the popular vote than he did in 2016. And the big reason was just a huge upsurge of votes in 2020. Plus, he was the incumbent, and incumbents have, a lot of advantages over challengers.
I think people were just also very motivated in 2020 to vote.
It was a huge upsurge in turnout on both sides.
Right.
Trump, stimulating people to vote for him, and even more so, stimulating people to vote against him.
President Belichick, one of our many presidents.
Gosh.
What's up, President Belichick? What's up, stud? I saw your comment earlier. They say, I'm a high school U.S. history teacher, and I use the keys. Would love to know if there is a new 24 edition. Yes, there is.
It's coming out.
And will include 16 and 20. It will, correct?
Yep.
So, yes, it will, President Belichick. Don't you worry. Thank you for tuning in. All right. I'm scanning the questions now. Let's see here. Let's see if I can find a good one for you, Dad.
Okay, we got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah, maybe 10 more minutes. What are your thoughts? This is from Naja Rosario. They say, thoughts on Harris saying that she's ready to step in the role of the president if Biden is unwell. What are your thoughts, Dad?
Well, number one, of course, the whole point of having a vice president, aside from presiding over the Senate, which is important now, given the narrow margins separating the parties, the point is to have someone who is capable of stepping in to the presidency. We've had quite a few vice presidents assuming the role of a president. Most recently, of course, Gerald Ford, who had not even been elected vice president. He was an appointed vice president, becoming president when Richard Nixon resigned. Of course, we had Lyndon Johnson becoming president when John F. Kennedy died. Harry Truman becoming president when Franklin Roosevelt died. So yes, we need to have a vice president capable of stepping in, but I don't think Kamala Harris should be talking about this. I don't even think she should be hinting that there would be some problem with Joe Biden taking on the reins of a second term.
I agree with that. I agree. I think it's actually a right-wing...
it's a right-wing talking
point. Yeah. Question from Alex Shim. What's up, Alex? And this is a personal question. Do you, Allan and Sam, have you chosen a successor picked for your future
A successor for what?
For your future grandson/son to continue the 13 Keys legacy.
First, I have to have grandchildren.
Right. We're still quite a ways away from
premature.
that, Alex. I don't think we
haven't gotten there yet.
We haven't really gotten there yet.
But my wife, Karen Strickler, is very concerned about maintaining the legacy.
Yeah. So it's not going to be me. I'm not a political historian or anything. So
grandchildren.
Maybe I guess it'll be one of the grandkids, I guess. That's a good question. That's an interesting question. Alex Finn says, how do you look so good at 76? Come on, he doesn't look that good.
Hey.
I'm
going to give an answer to that.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm often asked, what is the secret to a successful old age? And there are many things, but I want to highlight one thing. Regular aerobic exercise. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything: running, tennis, racquetball, even walking. And just showing up and doing it is 80%. No matter what you do. The other 20% is hard. If you want to do it like I'm trying to do, be a competitive athlete at age 76. The other 20% is hard. But the 80% is just basically from showing up and doing it. And by the way, I don't know if I told you, I was training with my son for the senior Maryland Olympics to run the 200, 400, and 800 meter dashes. And 2 weeks before, I pulled a hamstring. So, when you're trying for that 20%, it could be perilous in your old age, but you don't need to.
Connor Qatar asked, does your system apply to governors? It does not, Connor.
I tried that.
He's tried
that. It's very hard to apply one set of questions to, 50 gubernatorial elections.
Paul Folo asked, Lichtman, are we underestimating DeSantis' support / overestimating Trump's, considering the polls are always wrong?
Quite possibly. Yeah. And, the polls have shown, Republicans and Democrats, neck and neck. And yet, whenever there's been an election recently in 2022, or, for example, this Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, Democrats have done extremely well. A 10-point victory for this Supreme Court candidate in Wisconsin, statewide in a very narrowly divided swing state. So, there has been a disconnect between the polls and what happens when people actually vote, which is why I always say, polls are snapshots. They're good at the moment. They are not predictors. Polls are not predictors.
There's a bunch of questions about Republicans impeaching Biden. We've talked about this, so if you want to hear more, go back. I don't think anything's changed, has it, Dad?
No, they have no basis.
Right. It's pretty absurd at this point.
They've been pursuing this idea that Biden somehow was engaged in corruption in Ukraine when he was vice president. They've been pursuing this for 4 years. Donald Trump's very loyal Justice Department investigated this, and they couldn't come up with anything. So this is just a ploy, just like this so-called impeachment in Wisconsin. If you want to see a real impeachment, look to Texas.
That's true.
When Republicans, who control overwhelmingly the Texas legislature, voted to impeach the very conservative Attorney General Paxton, and now, just starting, he is being tried by the overwhelmingly Republican Senate. That's an interesting, because they obviously have a very strong case for corruption, or, the Republican House would never have impeached him.
But I thought the far left Marxists were the corrupt ones in America.
Why, what?
I thought the far left Marxists in America were the real corruption problem in America.
This is another one of these, right-wing buzzwords. I just saw it invoked today by Peter Navarro.
Oh, right. He
Trump
was
aide, who
right
was
before.
convicted.
Yeah, right before he went live, he got
Yeah,
convicted.
who did he blame it on? The left-wing Marxists. I have yet to meet one, but they must be around somewhere.
They're hiding under rocks.
Yeah.
Here's a very specific question from Captain M90s. Would you call the short-term economy key by October 24th?
Yes.
You are?
By October 24, I will have called it.
Oh, October 24. I thought
October 24.
Right. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. I was thinking that as October 24th, 2023 for some reason.
No.
Okay. If Trump is convicted and not removed from the nomination, do you expect for a lot of Republicans to stay at home?
Very, very interesting question. And again, under normal circumstances, of course. Trump has already been convicted of sexual assault, civilly, but still, of sexual assault and defamation. His Trump organization was criminally convicted of tax fraud. It's not as if there isn't this record of convictions against him, and it doesn't seem to have moved the Trump base at all. So I'm very loath to make predictions about the Trump base cracking.
You're not a doctor, but Connor Qatar wants to know, what are your thoughts on the return of COVID?
Something that, again, seems to have flown under the radar. I think, I'm not a doctor. I am, though, but not that kind of doctor.
Right.
It seems like, we may be entering a new epidemic of COVID, or at best, COVID's going to be like the flu, constantly with us. I think it's a grave danger that's kind of like so much else, flown under the radar while the media covers all this fluff and flash.
Here's a good question from Staffer. I know you like to answer this question to me, so now you can answer it to the people. What do you think of Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I think he had to withdraw from Afghanistan, and that wasn't a policy that he started. It was a policy initiated by Trump, but I do think he could have planned it better. It wasn't a terrible withdrawal, but again, the media way overplayed how bad it was, and the optics weren't good at all. And optics matter in politics. So I think it was the right thing to do, and I think most Americans think it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't done right.
You also didn't like the media. From what I remember you telling me, you didn't like the media's coverage of the withdrawal.
I did not. I thought it was way over the top, as if they were trying to prove we can be just as hard on on Biden as we were on Trump. It was way over the top. And again, too much focused on the optics and so little on the substance. I bash the media a lot, but the folks in the media, they're my friends. They're smart. They're righteous for the most part, but they have to give us a story every single day, and they got to keep their ratings up, and ratings are a big problem because, there are so many ways now people get their information. Back when Kennedy went up against Nixon in 1960, basically, there were 3 networks and 3 or 4 newspapers. Now there are thousands of outlets by which people get their information.
And President Belichick rightly points out Afghanistan wasn't anywhere near something like Saigon in 1976.
Wasn't close. Not close.
Here's an interesting question from Mohammed Bakshalapur. Regarding Biden being underrated, isn't that the Democrats' own fault? I kind of agree with him
I kind of agree
bit.
with that too. In part, I said it's the very nature of the media to cover the flash and the fluff, not the substance. But, and I've been saying this, you've heard me say this for years. In fact, since you were a toddler, right? Democrats are very bad at messaging. They really haven't had good messaging probably since the first days of Obama, back in 2008, 2009. Republicans have been vastly better at messaging. Democrats need, I want to quote my great late friend Jerry Hebert, who always said, you got to bring it down to where the goats can get it. And Democrats have not been very good at that.
Do you know anything about Helmut Norpoth, Dad?
I do.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. He has, an interesting but very flawed model. He's a professor at, I think, New York, Stony Brook, State University of New York, Stony Brook. And he was one of the 2, along with me, to correctly predict Trump's win in 2016. And his model is basically based upon early primary results. Well, he could not have crashed more spectacularly and burned up in a more flaming way in 2020 when his model not only predicted that Donald Trump would win in 2020, but would win in a landslide with 360 electoral college votes. He barely cracked 200 electoral college votes. So he was lucky in 2016, but I wouldn't put any faith whatsoever in his model. But he's a great guy. I have nothing against him personally. It's just not a good model.
Right. Kathy Holloway says, I really appreciate the both of you. We really appreciate you, Kathy. Thank you for watching. Okay, guys, we're going to wrap up here.
One more question.
You want one more question?
I want one more question.
All right, he wants one more question. Start throwing them in the chat, guys.
If you got one. If not, we can wrap.
No, I'm sure people have questions.
One more question.
Okay.
A bonus question, Sam.
A bonus question. Guys, throw your bonus questions in the chat.
All right. I'm going to just say one last thing if there are no more questions.
No, we got one.
Okay.
What do you think? How do you think independents look at Trump overall, Dad? What do you think? And there's always such a focus on independents.
Yeah. There aren't that many real independents. It's a bit of a myth. Most independents lean either Republican or Democrat. And the Republican-leaning independents are still very much in the Trump camp. The Democratic-leaning independents are not. Again, I reiterate, Trump is the Republican Party, and those who identify with the Republican Party are part of the Trump movement. You know, this has been this great meaningless debate. Is Trump really a conservative? And, you know, some old line conservatives like George Will have said, oh, no, he's not really a conservative. And, you know, my response is, you really need to rethink that, since the overwhelming majority of those who identify as conservatives, either among rank and file voters or in the Congress or in the state legislature, are behind Trump.
Anonymous Bear says that they're a believer that if COVID never happened in 2020, Trump might still be in office. Agree or disagree? Actually, he's said before, Anonymous Bear, that, yeah, it turned a lot of keys against Trump and very well might have been in office.
Right, but you don't know.
But yeah, you never know. But
I don't like to answer, as you know, hypotheticals. But certainly I can say non-hypothetically that Trump's botching of COVID-19 cost him enough keys to predict his defeat.
Yeah.
All right, I want to say one last thing. Final tribute to my great late friend, a hero of voting rights, Jerry Hebert. You know, get out and vote. Get your friends, neighbors to get out and vote. You know, as I point out in the Embattled Vote for America, people for centuries have fought and died for the right to vote. We should honor them and honor all those who have fought for the right to vote with the simple act of voting and getting out the vote.
Yes. So if you missed the beginning of our live stream, this is going out to our friend Jerry Hebert, who passed away this morning, who was a titan of voting rights. So this episode goes out to him. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your super chats. It really helps. Throw a like on the video if you're still watching. It really helps us get our video out there. It helps the YouTube algorithm. Let's see, who's still tuning in? Kelvin Cam, Michael De Souza Cruz, Linda Fusco, Joshua D, Patrick Murray, Vicky, Izzy, Alex Shim. Thank you all for watching. This broadcast is in tribute of Jerry Hebert. Thank you.